PowerPoint presentation with those online as well.
Okay. It starts from the position that Prabhupada stated that the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam is 5,000 years old, and that point is made by the text itself, and it's also culturally from the background of the culture, that's also kind of an accepted thing. It states that this Bhagavata Purāna is as brilliant as the sun, appearing or arising just after the departure of Lord Krishna to his own abode. And that at that point, we're talking about the beginning of Kali-yuga, which traditionally is dated to 3102 BC. And Sariputta Prabhu, by using his astronomical intelligence and computer programs, backtrack the positions of the planets to try to find the planetary alignment that coincides with or there's characteristic of the beginning of Kali-yuga, and found that on that date there was a rare planetary alignment that was said to have occurred at the beginning of Kali-yuga. So the position that I'm taking is that is correct. Prabhupada also said that the culture from which this, how do I go on to the next one? Yeah, the culture from which the Bhagavatam comes was at one time prevalent worldwide, and this is a statement that's generated a lot of kind of discussion and arguments and amongst devotees in the academic community. The text itself, it's a big text, lots of verses, many volumes, contains a rich description of the culture from which it originates. And so my position is that everyday physical cultural components described in the text should be consistent with what is known of cultures from the same time period, at least in the old world of Eurasia and Africa, but not necessarily confined to that we know of from archaeology and ancient history in Western academia. So per those disciplines, 5,000 years ago, the prominent level of cultural evolution and technological development was what is called the Neolithic or the early Metal Ages, depending on where you happen to be in the world at that time. So this research is going to explore this issue from an anti-colonialist, decolonizing stance that's suggested by these authors here. Let's see. Oh, that was the right one. Patel and Lagrange, but this is not a new approach. It's something that kind of originated post World War II, but has been gaining momentum. A way of looking at non-Western cultures, stripping away the kind of the stance that there has been prevalent in Western academia towards, say, Indian culture or any other culture around the world, that you guys don't really know what you're talking about. You say that your culture says this, but this is what it really means, because we're the ones who do know what we're talking about. Right? So that's a colonialist way of looking at things, And so this anti-colonialist approach actually is advantageous to us when we're trying to present Vedic culture. So we're accepting, or I'm accepting, that the primary authority on the meaning of the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam is the text itself and the culture in which it's embedded. And that you know, the Western and Westernized scholars may at times approach the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam from their perspective of assumed academic superiority, right? And that this is actually a form of colonialist oppression. And any discrepancies between Western or Westernized scholarly views and traditional cultural views of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam may help to identify deficiencies in Western scholarship, not deficiencies in the Vedic cultural perspective. And that the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam may provide evidence, or it does provide evidence of a societal structure and way of life from 5,000 years ago that can inform archaeology and ancient history in cases where their evidence is currently insufficient. In other words, we're flipping things around and saying that the Vedic culture is the authority on itself and not Western scholars. And it can help the West to understand things better. So the hypothesis is that a simple qualitative content analysis of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, identifying basic Vedic cultural components, will yield an assemblage thanks, that is consistent with known technological and other material achievements of other cultures worldwide, contemporary with the beginning of Kali-yuga, approximately 5,000 years ago. In cultures for which there is a known literary record extending that far back in time, there should also be basic similarities in social organization, social behaviors, patterns of thought, etc. And that the deconstruction of Vedic culture could be used to infer interpretations of aspects of cultures of the same period, for example, that don't have any literary records, like the Neolithic in Western Europe, for example. So the method was simple. I'm going to read the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam and I'm going to make notes. Every time there's something mentioned about that there's a kind of cultural component, I note it down. I'm not doing any kind of quantitative thing here, simply qualitative, and just accumulating and sorting lists of cultural components that comprise the culture that is depicted in the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. So the material cultural components which represent the level of technological advancement of the culture presented in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, I sorted them into categories for ease of comparison with the archaeological and ancient historical record. And then consistencies and inconsistencies will be are identified and explanations offered. And elements of non-literary cultures will also be interpreted using information gained from this deconstruction of Vedic culture in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam to assess the potential usefulness of this approach. And so I didn't mention that actually, okay, so, you know, if you as you read the Bhagavatam, you get all these different cultural elements popping out at you, some of which are material or have, you know, things like jewelry or tools or weapons and so on. And there's others that are kind of more to do with the way things are organized. And then there's also obviously the mystical component. So I'm not paying, I'm noting those things, but I'm not paying attention to them in this particular presentation. I'm just simply sticking to the kind of more tangible material things. Okay, so I had to start somewhere, and I was thinking, okay, well, the 10th canto describes Krishna's pastimes, and the Bhagavatam arose just after Krishna's departure. So those pastimes are pretty much contemporary with the Bhagavatam. So I started at the beginning of the 10th canto and just read the first 5 chapters. And that certainly gave me enough material to talk about. But really, the whole Bhagavatam needs to be gone through. And besides the parts that are kind of more or less, the events are more or less contemporary with the writing of the Bhagavatam, all of the other stories in the Bhagavatam contain things that would have necessarily been understandable to the people of the time 5,000 years ago. So even if it's a story that was way back in time, so in other words, I'm going to have to read the whole Bhagavatam and do this. But this is just a sample. So I grouped the components under different headings. And so this is what I'm just going to give you the preliminary results here. Okay. So if we look at metallurgy, so in archaeology, the emergence of metalworking cultures is like kind of a big thing. And so these are things that are mentioned in the first 5 chapters of the 10th canto. There are mines, gold used for jewelry and so on. And I've highlighted in red because this is something that would be contested by Western scholars. Iron used for making nails for construction, and also chains and shackles, you know, like Devaki and Vasudeva in Kamsa's prison. And I checked that I checked the Sanskrit word as well in the Sanskrit dictionary. So, and definitely they're using the term iron shackles. So the Iron Age in India is not currently thought to extend that far back in time. So, but nevertheless, we're taking the approach that the Bhagavatam is telling us is correct. So the archaeologists have got some work to do to find evidence of 5,000 years old iron working in India. Then if we go on to this next one, so the military. So the military is throughout the Bhagavatam, there's armies and they're organized in a certain way. There's a commanders in chief. The king is usually like, at the head. And so we see an organized military. This is just in the first 5 chapters of the 10th canto. That an organized military with warrior personnel. There's the king, the commander in chief, tacticians, archers, swordsmen, infantry, charioteers, etc. And there's all these different kinds of weapons, including the chakra, which is not used by any of the soldiers, but it's mentioned as one of the goddess Durga's paraphernalia that she is wielding. So I included that because the concept of a wheel weapon is there, right? Chariots, which have wheels, horses and tackle, for example, reins. And then the army itself and the divisions of the army, the phalanx is the one that's usually mentioned, right? So again, I've highlighted a couple of things in red. That chariots, the oldest chariots are, not as old as 5,000 years old, but they're getting there. And throwing discs as weapons. Anyway, we'll come to that in a minute. We'll return to those topics. We'll go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so then there's agriculture. We're talking about a pastoral community of cow herds. So the knowledge that is required for taking care of cows, milking them, producing milk products, all of that. And there's also grains mentioned, and cloth. So you need fibers for manufacturing cloth. The spices and oil are mentioned, so you need oil producing plants. There's animal husbandry, raising crops. There's a bullock cart mentioned, pulled by yoked oxen. You've got the domestication of the horse and the keeping of elephants in captivity, and a mention of a standard measure for a quantity of grain called a hill of grain. 5 minutes, okay. Then next you've got lots of mentions of clothing and bodily ornaments, various different types of jewelry, cosmetics, the black eyeliner and the kumkum powder mentioned. And if we go on to the next one, society. So then the picture you get of this society is there's a supreme being recognized that's above everybody else. And you've got these Brahmins who are, these priests, saintly persons, the sadhus, the sages. You've got administrators and warriors. You've got, which includes the idea of having prisons and prison guards. And you've got the agriculturalists and the manufacturers of all these different things, and then just general workers of different kinds. So you've got the kind of, even though it's not mentioned in the first 5 chapters specifically, the Varnashram system, you've got the components of it. You just see it. That's how the society is organized. There's the concepts of good and evil, and in the sense of right and wrong, laws, etc., and punishments administered by the state. You've got capital cities, towns, villages, farmland, mines, place names. Then you've got the family unit, and so you've got marriage, you've got wives, you've got maidservants. There's the idea of families having a status in society, and there's gender roles and some gender segregation. Men and women have their, not just roles, but they're kind of tend to hang out separately. And then there's times set aside for festivals and celebrations and sacrifices. So then if we go on to the next one, roles and occupations, there's a variety of different jobs that people are doing and roles that they have in society. So if we go on to deconstruct. So if we look at the example, then, okay, so what is this, what can we say about all this? We've got this picture emerging of this society. So if we take the example of astrology, and astrology and the determination of appropriate times for specific activities such as sacrifices and rituals. Okay, so if you've got astrology, you need astronomy. Astronomy means at least observations of the sun, moon, and other objects in the sky over time, so that predictions can then be made. So it's like, there have to be people, there have to be experts in this field. If we look at Neolithic and early Metal Age cultures, they appear to have possessed techniques involving aspects of the landscape and technologies that aided the task of making astronomical observations. As Dhrutakama Prabhu was talking about archaeoastronomy, so that's a big field nowadays. And you've got some places where the landscape itself is used for making these observations, or structures are made like Stonehenge and stone circles and other megalithic structures for doing that kind of thing. So this astronomical information that's in the Bhagavatam argues that such techniques were used 5,000 years ago in India. They would have to be in order for them to make these predictions. Then if we look at Stonehenge as another example, So some recent research on Stonehenge, some researchers built a scale model using 3D printing of Stonehenge, and then measured the acoustics of Stonehenge as it was at its height, and found that the sound that's made inside the circle of Stonehenge gets amplified by the stones, but if you're outside of the stone circle, then the sound becomes more muted. So it kind of keeps the sound within the henge, and so, you know, it wouldn't be a new idea that Stonehenge and all of these similar structures were used for rituals. That's, archaeologists have been saying that for a long time. But if we kind of borrow what we know about Vedic culture, which had needed astronomical observation, performed sacrifices requiring sacrificial arenas and the chanting of mantras, then we can hypothesize that Stonehenge was in fact a dual-purpose astronomical observatory and sacrificial arena, because it seems to be built in such a way that it promotes the chanting of mantras in the circle. I'm run out of time now. Has I completely run out of time? Okay. So anyway, if we go on to, things have been changing in archaeology over the last 10, 15 years, especially because of the discovery of datable, very ancient sites like Göbekli Tepe, and that these ancient sites also have it's theorized that they were used for astronomical purposes. So again, you know, you can kind of, so if we look at bottom line, if we look at Vedic culture not necessarily as looking like, if it was worldwide, it's not going to look exactly like it does in India, right? But if we strip it down to the basic components, then we can maybe see, okay, this is what Prabhupada meant when he said Vedic culture was around the world, right? Supreme being, astronomy, astrology, sacrifices, rituals, and all the rest of it is a much more understandable way of seeing how Vedic, if that's what Vedic culture was, and it would manifest slightly differently in different places around the world. But, sorry.